My boyfriend's sister told me she ran the house and that I was just the girlfriend. She completely lost control when we got engaged. I started dating my boyfriend, Owen, 2 years ago. We met at a friend's barbecue and ended up talking for nearly 3 hours about everything and nothing at all. He asked me out the very next day, and we've been together ever since. Owen is kind, hardworking, and treats me better than anyone I've dated before. He owns a 3-bedroom house that he purchased before we met. He worked years of overtime to afford the down payment and takes pride in what he built for himself. The only real issue in our relationship is his sister, Norine. She moved in with Owen 5 years ago after her divorce. The arrangement was supposed to last only a few months while she got back on her feet. 5 years later, she is still living there. She doesn't pay rent, she doesn't help with utilities, she occasionally buys groceries, but only items she prefers. Owen allows her to stay because she's his sister, and he feels guilty about her marriage ending. At first, I understood. Family matters, and I didn't want to create tension between them. However, Norine made it clear early on that she viewed me as a problem. The first time I stayed over at Owen's house, she watched me closely, as if I didn't belong there. She asked how long I'd been dating her brother, what I did for work, how much money I made, and whether I had my own place or planned to move in. Every question felt intrusive. When I left the next morning, she told Owen I seemed nice, but that something about me felt off. He later told me about it and thought it was amusing. I didn't. Over the following year, Norine's behavior intensified. She rearranged things after I cleaned. She cooked elaborate meals on nights Owen and I had dinner plans so he would feel guilty leaving. She constantly interrupted our conversations and movie nights. She knocked on his bedroom door at odd hours with questions that could have waited. She made sure I always remembered she lived there too. After 18 months together, Owen asked me to move in. I was excited until I realized Norine had no intention of leaving. Owen said she just needed more time and that she was close to getting her own place. He asked me to be patient because she was family. I agreed to move in because I loved him and believed we could make it work. The day I brought my first box into the house, Norine pulled me aside while Owen was outside unloading more items. Standing in the hallway, she spoke quietly so only I could hear. She told me this was her house. She said she'd lived there for 5 years and I was just the girlfriend. She said Owen might own the property, but she controlled the household. She told me I could stay in his bedroom, but the rest of the house belonged to her. She warned that if I tried to change anything or force her out, she would make my life miserable. Then she smiled and walked away as if nothing had happened. I stood there holding a box of books, trying to process what had just occurred. The next 6 months were exactly as she promised. She criticized everything I did. She complained about my water usage, said my cooking smelled bad, and rearranged groceries so I couldn't find anything. She took control of the television every evening and refused to share. She told Owen I was messy despite my constant cleaning and accused me of being rude even though I barely spoke to her. She cried to him about feeling pushed out of her home, even though no one was pushing her anywhere. Owen defended me privately, but he never confronted Norine directly. He said she was sensitive and still recovering from her divorce. He asked me to be understanding. I gave her 6 months of patience. Then I stopped. I began by reclaiming shared space. Norine had spread her belongings throughout the house. I gathered her items from common areas and neatly placed them in her bedroom. When she complained, I told Owen I was simply organizing. He agreed it was reasonable. She couldn't object without admitting she had taken over spaces that weren't hers. Next, I started cooking dinner every night. Norine used to cook whenever she wanted Owen's attention, but now I prepared his favorite meals before he got home. She tried to compete, but Owen said he felt bad eating twice. He ended up eating alone while we ate together. Then I took over household management. I created a chore schedule and posted it on the refrigerator. I included Norine because she lived there rent-free and needed to contribute. She became angry and said I had no authority to assign her tasks. I explained to Owen that it was fair since I contributed more despite moving in years later. He agreed and told Norine she needed to help. That was the first boundary he ever set with her.
From there, Norine began to unravel. She skipped chores, made passive-aggressive comments, and tried to complain to Owen privately. I responded calmly and made sure Owen and I spent more time together. I wasn't arguing with her, I was simply occupying space she assumed was permanently hers. The situation escalated when Owen mentioned we'd been discussing engagement. Norine stopped in the hallway outside his bedroom. We were sitting on the bed talking about timelines and rings when she suddenly opened the door without knocking. Her face drained of color before turning red with anger. She stood there breathing heavily and staring at us. She stormed into the living room, pointing at me and shouting that an engagement would be the worst mistake of Owen's life. She accused me of using him for his house and claimed I had already forced her out of her home. Owen tried to calm her down, but she continued yelling that I had turned him against his family. I stayed silent, knowing anything I said would worsen the situation. Eventually, she locked herself in her room. Over the next 3 days, her behavior escalated further. She blasted music at 2 a.m., drained all the hot water before my early work days, and accused me of saying cruel things about his family. Owen believed me, but admitted she provided no details. I began keeping notes, documenting dates, times, and incidents. I didn't know when I'd need it, but I knew I would. 2 weeks later, Owen proposed at our favorite Italian restaurant with his grandmother's ring. I said yes immediately. Despite our happiness, I felt uneasy about what awaited us at home. When we told Norine, she broke down, accusing Owen of abandoning her and claiming she had nowhere to go. Owen reassured her she could stay as long as she needed. That moment made it clear we couldn't continue living like this. I later told Owen I couldn't move forward with wedding planning while his sister lived there rent-free and treated me like an outsider. I asked him to set a real timeline for her to leave. As we began planning, Norine sabotaged every step, scheduling loud renovations, criticizing venues, and inserting herself into decisions. I documented everything. Eventually, evidence surfaced showing Norine earned more than Owen and had been financially capable of moving out for years. When confronted with documentation and testimony from Owen's closest friend, who revealed Norine had sabotaged his previous relationships the same way, Owen finally saw the pattern. The next morning, after reviewing all the evidence, Owen reached a breaking point. He said he needed to set a firm deadline for Norine to move out and enforce it this time. When I asked if he was certain, he said he was never more sure.
He said he had wasted years enabling behavior that damaged both of them and that it had to stop. That evening, Owen called Norine into the living room. I stood beside him because I wanted it to be clear we were unified. She came in looking irritated, as if we had interrupted her television show, and sat on the couch with her arms crossed. Owen took a deep breath and told her she had 60 days to find an apartment and move out. He said he would help with the first month's rent and the security deposit, but the current living arrangement was no longer working and had to end. Norine's expression shifted quickly from annoyed to shocked to angry. She stood up and accused me of influencing him and turning him against his family. Owen told her this was his decision and that he had been considering it for some time. Norine immediately changed tactics and began crying. She said she couldn't believe her own brother was abandoning her the same way her ex-husband had. She claimed she had nowhere to go and couldn't afford to live alone. Owen reminded her of her full-time job and the savings account I had uncovered. Her tears stopped almost instantly once she realized he knew about her finances. Her demeanor turned cold. She told Owen he was choosing a woman he barely knew over the sister who had supported him his entire life. She said I would eventually leave him and he would regret pushing away the one person who truly loved him. Owen's hands were shaking, but he stayed firm. He repeated that the deadline was 60 days and it was final. Norine looked at me with open hostility and said this wasn't over. She then left the room and slammed her bedroom door hard enough to shake the pictures on the wall. Owen sat heavily on the couch and buried his face in his hands. I sat beside him and placed a hand on his back. I told him I was proud of him and understood how difficult that had been. He looked up with tears in his eyes and said he hoped he was doing the right thing. I told him he was and that we would handle this together.
The following weeks were tense, but Norine appeared to accept the deadline. She began looking at apartments online and even toured a few places. Owen relaxed slightly, believing she might finally understand the situation. I remained cautious. By then, I knew Norine too well to believe this would end quietly. Exactly 1 week before the deadline, Norine suddenly developed severe stomach pains. One morning, she came out of her room hunched over and groaning. Owen immediately wanted to take her to the emergency room. I watched closely and noticed she was peeking at his reaction through her fingers as she complained. They spent 4 hours at the hospital. Doctors ran tests and found nothing wrong. Norine returned home with pain medication and a referral to see a specialist. She told Owen she couldn't possibly focus on apartment hunting while dealing with a medical crisis and needed time to recover first. I could see Owen starting to doubt the deadline. That night, after Norine went to bed, Owen suggested extending her time since she was sick. I told him no. I said this was manipulation and pointed out the timing of the illness. I reminded him that doctors found nothing wrong and that she had checked his reactions during her performance. Owen struggled with guilt, worrying about what kind of brother he would be if she truly was ill. I told him we were not resetting boundaries for a medical emergency that only appeared when consequences approached. Norine went to the emergency room 3 more times that week. Each visit produced no diagnosis. She stayed in her room groaning loudly while Owen grew exhausted from worry. I was exhausted from watching the same pattern repeat. The deadline passed. Norine was still in the house, claiming she was too sick to leave. Owen hadn't enforced the boundary, and I could see history repeating itself. I realized I couldn't live this way anymore. One morning, I packed a bag while Owen was at work and left it in my car. When he got home, I told him I was temporarily moving out and staying with Becca until Norine was gone for good. I explained calmly that I loved him, but I wouldn't continue participating in a cycle where boundaries disappeared the moment Norine created a crisis. He panicked and begged me not to leave. I told him I wasn't ending the relationship, but I needed proof through action that he was ready to prioritize us. I said I would return once Norine was actually gone. He cried and asked me to stay. I hugged him, told him this was the only way forward, and left. I cried the entire drive to Becca's apartment. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Becca hugged me without asking questions. She had been expecting this moment. 2 days later, Owen showed up at Becca's place. He looked exhausted, heartbroken, and determined. He told me he had enforced the deadline. He gave Norine 1 final week to leave or he would begin formal eviction proceedings. He said losing me made him realize he had been choosing his sister's comfort over our future for too long, and he was done doing that. I hugged him tightly and told him I knew how hard this was. He held on to me like he was afraid I might disappear. He told me Norine's illness vanished the moment he stood firm. She screamed at him, called their parents, and accused him of abandoning her while she was sick. He didn't back down. Norine's final week in the house was destructive. When I returned to help Owen manage the situation, I immediately noticed the smell of bleach. I opened the washing machine and found my clothes ruined. Every item was destroyed. Then we found deep scratches carved into the hardwood floor of the bedroom. She had written the word traitor into the wood. She broke dishes that belonged to Owen's grandmother, clogged drains, damaged walls, and broke a door lock. Owen photographed everything. As he documented the destruction, something shifted in him. He said this had crossed from manipulation to deliberate cruelty. When Norine refused to leave at the end of the week, Owen gave her 1 hour to pack or he would call the police. When she refused, he filed formal eviction paperwork the next morning without hesitation. He served the papers himself. She laughed until he told her their parents knew everything and supported his decision. That stopped her cold. Norine began calling relatives and posting online, leaving out every critical detail. Some people believed her. Others stopped speaking to her after hearing the truth. The situation spread beyond our home, and while I felt guilt, I knew none of it was my doing. One afternoon, Owen's mother, Tabitha, called me to meet for lunch privately. I agreed cautiously. She looked tired and older than I remembered. After ordering coffee, she apologized.
She said she was sorry for initially siding with Norine and not understanding what was really happening. She explained that she and Nolan had been enabling Norine's dependence since her divorce because they felt guilty about her failed marriage. They believed they were helping her recover, but instead they were preventing her from moving forward with her life. Watching Owen finally establish boundaries made them realize they needed to stop shielding Norine from the natural outcomes of her choices. I didn't know how to respond. I had expected anger or blame, not an apology and genuine self-reflection. Tabitha said she had talked with Owen, reviewed the photos of the damage, and understood why the eviction was necessary. She explained that she and Nolan would help Norine with moving expenses, but they fully supported Owen's decision. She said she hoped I could forgive them for not seeing the situation clearly sooner. I told her there was nothing to forgive and that I was relieved they understood now. We talked for over an hour about family dynamics, enabling behavior, and how difficult it can be to recognize manipulation when it comes from someone you love. Before we left, Tabitha hugged me and thanked me for not giving up on Owen. She said he needed someone strong enough to help him break the cycle. A few days later, Nolan went to see Norine. Owen told me about it afterward because Norine called him yelling shortly after their father left. Nolan sat with Norine in her room and told her that he and Tabitha would help cover moving costs, but they fully supported Owen's decision. He said they had watched her manipulate Owen for years and were ashamed they hadn't intervened sooner to encourage her independence. He explained that enabling her had seemed compassionate, but in reality it had prevented her from building her own life. Norine accused him of choosing Owen over her, like everyone else had. Nolan told her he was choosing what was healthy for both of his children, even if she couldn't accept it yet. He said he loved her, but he would no longer help her avoid the consequences of her decisions. She told him to leave, but Owen said something shifted in her expression when she realized her parents weren't taking her side this time. Her usual support system had collapsed, and she was finally facing the results of her own behavior. The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 93 days after Owen first told Norine she needed to move out. 3 months of manipulation, destruction, legal steps, and family conflict had led to this moment. Professional movers packed Norine's belongings while she supervised without acknowledging either of us. She had secured a 1-bedroom apartment across town, paid for partly by her parents and partly by her own savings, which she had finally admitted existed. The movers worked efficiently, and within 3 hours everything was loaded. Norine got into her car without saying goodbye and drove away, followed by the truck. Owen and I stood in the driveway watching them disappear. The house was finally ours. There was no more constant surveillance, manipulation, or tension. Owen cried. It wasn't sadness or happiness alone, but a mix of relief, grief, and guilt. He had reclaimed his home, but lost his relationship with his sister in the process. He had done the right thing, but it still hurt. I held him while he worked through it, letting him feel whatever he needed. Eventually, he pulled back and looked at the house as if seeing it for the first time. He said it already felt lighter. I told him that was what freedom felt like. The following 2 weeks were harder for Owen than I expected. He second-guessed himself and checked his phone constantly, wondering if Norine had reached out. He suggested driving by her apartment to make sure she was okay. He woke up at night worried she might need help. The guilt came in waves and sometimes overwhelmed him. Each time I reminded him that boundaries weren't cruelty and Norine was a capable adult who needed to build her own life.
I said she had been able to live independently for years, but chose dependence because it was easier and gave her control. Allowing her to face the natural results of her choices was the healthiest option for her long-term growth. Owen listened, but I could tell he struggled to fully believe it. One night, he suggested inviting her over to dinner to start repairing their relationship. I asked whether he thought she was ready or if he was trying to ease his own guilt. He admitted it was probably the guilt. I suggested couples counseling to help us navigate the family dynamics and strengthen communication. He agreed immediately. We found a therapist who specialized in family systems and boundaries. Our first session was the following week, and it helped more than I expected. Hearing a neutral third party confirm that Owen's boundaries were healthy lifted a significant weight from him. We started by reclaiming the master bedroom. Norine had chosen the paint years earlier, a dull beige that made the room feel cramped. Owen and I picked a soft gray-blue that made the space feel brighter. I painted, while Owen removed the damaged flooring and replaced it with new hardwood. We rearranged the furniture and added pieces from my old apartment. By the end of the month, the room felt entirely different. Owen slept better. He stopped checking his phone at night. One afternoon, I caught him smiling while folding laundry. He said he was just happy to finally feel at home. We moved on to the living room, rearranging furniture to encourage conversation instead of focusing on the television. We added plants, shelves, and lighter curtains. The house felt calmer, shared, and balanced. We cooked together without criticism, watched movies without interruptions, and hosted friends without tension. 2 months after Norine moved out, Owen received a message from Norine asking if he wanted to meet for coffee. The tone was different. She asked instead of demanded. Owen asked what I thought. I told him it was his choice and that I supported him. They met at a coffee shop, and when Owen returned, he told me she had apologized sincerely. She admitted she had relied on him to avoid dealing with her own life and had started therapy. Owen accepted the apology, but said he needed time before rebuilding their relationship. Norine understood. Wedding planning became easier without interference. We chose a small garden venue for early October. Owen's parents were supportive, and Tabitha helped me with planning. We invited Norine as a guest with clear boundaries. She accepted without trying to insert herself. Our wedding day arrived on a beautiful autumn afternoon. Norine attended quietly and respectfully, leaving early. Owen's parents celebrated while clearly mourning the family unity that might never fully return. Standing at the altar, I knew our relationship wasn't a fairy tale with a perfect ending. It was real, complicated, and hard-earned. We had fought for it and survived. That was enough.